Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Volpe Bazzo Report. You'll see that I'm alone today because it seems that when I used to go to school, you remember in the report card, do they play well with others? The teachers used to write no, and apparently it still holds true today. But actually, Dominic is probably down in Florida sipping Mai Tais, and we're taping here on January 9th, which is the governor's State of the State address. So a lot of our friends are up in Albany, invited guests to watch the State of the State address. So I'm here by myself, and for the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk about things that have been in the news, that are going to be in the news, because I'm very prophetic. And number one, I want to let you know, for the folks in Yorktown, you could always find my column every week on the editorial page of the Yorktown News, Bazzo Says. And I want to start with the thing that's really been in the news locally here for us, and that is the Journal News publicizing the addresses of gun permit holders. Now, these are citizens that legally bought weapons. And the Journal News, because it is a left-leaning ideological editorial paper, decided that their First Amendment rights trumped the people's right to privacy. Yes, they had a right to publish those addresses because that is public information. But having the right to do something doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. What they did here, and it's not just telling people that have nefarious motives who's got guns. It's telling them who doesn't have guns. And if you remember, like all bullies, they go for you can only bully somebody weaker than you. So if you are armed with any kind of weapon from a knife on up, your chances of doing something nefarious will be with people without weapons. And the Journal News, by publishing those with weapons, like I said, has now given people with nefarious motives houses to go to that they know don't have weapons. And this is almost borders on journalistic malpractice. The First Amendment of the freedom of the press did protect speech. Initially, it was political speech. But understand what the Second Amendment was all about. The Supreme Court, over the years, including the last two, has said the Second Amendment does mean that the individual citizen has the right to bear arms, to protect themselves. Now, the reason why the Second Amendment was put in the Bill of Rights was for the citizens to protect themselves from the government, not just because you had a lot of space between a lot of houses in the countryside to protect themselves from Indians and marauders and like that, but also to protect themselves from the government. You know this because the Third Amendment, which you must read to be in context with the Second Amendment, says that the government cannot force you to board its soldiers. England did this back in the day. They forced private homeowners to board their military. This was a form of intimidation without compensation. Now, the Third Amendment, when you read this with the Second Amendment, is there to protect you from all the amendments are there to protect you from the government. That's why the Constitution could not have been ratified without the initial Bill of Rights. That's why you have enumerated powers to the federal government. The Constitution doesn't tell people what they can do. It tells the government specifically what it can do, and whatever it said in the 10th, and like it said in the 10th Amendment, whatever it has not specifically assigned to the federal government belongs to the states and to the people. The problem is, in the last maybe decade, maybe 20 years or 10 years, we have become a post-constitutional republic. In other words, we have scared people enough in this information age that they think the only way to protect themselves is by surrendering their liberties to the government to give them security. Problem is, when you surrender your liberties for security, you wind up with neither liberty nor security. Because the federal government, as our founding fathers knew even back then, a central government, all it wants to do is grow and grow and grow. It is the nature of the beast, and we have seen it now. And what happens, like this one, we have a paper that acts irresponsibly, though legally, it acts irresponsibly. Because it will win in a court of law with Putnam, because you have to understand, Putnam County has now refused to release the list of registered gun owners in Putnam County so the Journal News can print it. This will probably wind up in court. The Journal News, as the way the law is written now, would probably win. But Putnam County is right to fight on behalf of the people. These are people that bought weapons legally. They, as far as we know, have no ulterior motives to use these weapons. And the only reason why the Journal News wants to put the scarlet G on their head for gun instead of the scarlet A for adultery is to intimidate these people. We're going to say that we're going to throw away the Second Amendment to protect the First Amendment. Well, you cannot throw one amendment away to protect the other. Okay? Because once you allow freedoms to be taken away at one level, all freedoms become in jeopardy. That is the true slippery slope. And you have a newspaper, because for some reason they think that innocent people should be highlighted in the news instead of the guilty. You know, there is a database of convicted felons that were also convicted of having these weapons. Now, that's fine. You want to print that? That's fine with me. But when somebody does something totally... to me, it would be like every time there was a car accident, we print the names of everybody that has a driver's license and where they live. Because, you know, owning a car obviously must be a terrible thing to have. And to the people that believe in man-made global warming, it is. However, driving is a privilege. Gun ownership is a right. And you got these newspapers and you got these politicians who think you can legislate away an amendment. You cannot. You can only remove an amendment through another amendment. And it was a difficult process that the Founding Fathers devised so that it didn't just go with the whim of the people. It had to be thought out. You needed 2/3 of the Congress, then you needed 2/3 of the state. You know, when you hear Obama talk about he's going to propose an amendment or he's going to sign an amendment, the man's an idiot. The President of the United States has nothing to do with the amendment process. Absolutely nothing. The executive branch of the government is out of that process. It is the Congress to the states, not the other way around. You just have, but you also have these self-serving politicians that want to pile on and say, we want a national database of all registered gun owners. Well, why would you want a national database of innocent people other than to know where they live, what they have, and how you can get it from them? Remember, the government's idea is to grow and take away your liberties. First, they want to control your speech. That's when they talk about the fairness doctrine. They want to control what you hear, even though when the fairness doctrine was enacted, you only had 4 major stations, a couple of radio stations and all that. Now you have the internet and cable and besides radio and TV. And so the need for the fairness doctrine is obsolete, but the idea to bring it out is to control what you hear. Then you have now these people that want to know what weapons you have. It's not the federal government's business. The state can license you. And these are state issues. But this is not a federal issue. This is an encroachment of the federal government on your private life because they want to intimidate you. They, too, want to put the scarlet G on your head. They don't want you defending yourself against them. And that is the pertinent fact of what's going on here. You have elected officials, Gerald Adler, for one, a congressman from New York City who believes only the federal government should be allowed to have weapons. To hell with what the Second Amendment says. He's one of those people that believes that the Constitution is an antiquated document to be disregarded at will, except we're supposed to be a country of the rule of law. And the rule of law is the limiting of the powers of the federal government. But you had a shooting in Connecticut, then you had the one in Colorado. We haven't had a big one here in New York that I know of. But we want to jump on the bandwagon, and now the governor, because he's going to be doing his State of the State address, is going to propose more limitations on gun ownership in New York. Now, none of the things anybody has ever proposed up to this date would have prevented what happened in Connecticut because those guns were bought legally. The son stole them. And anybody that has a nefarious motive can always get their hands on weapons. Look at all the gang violence you have. None of those weapons are legal, but they find a way to get them shipped into this country. What you are seeing are pandering politicians, including the governor, that thinks by punishing the innocent will stop the guilty, which it isn't going to happen. The problem you have with these gun laws is not that we don't have enough laws, is the enforcement mechanism and the preventive mechanism. You have a system in New York City called stop and frisk that is now being challenged in court. In fact, a court now in New York has ruled that the New York City police cannot use stop and frisk on private property, even though the owners of that property have given them permission to do this. It says that it targets minorities, which is not necessarily... It's not necessarily what it does. You see, they're only trying to use raw statistics. They're not going, the fact is the cops go where the crime is. And if it's in this neighborhood and the neighborhood is primarily minority, then you could say it targets minorities. But why? I mean, it's like those scanners at the airports when you scan little old ladies when you're supposed to be looking for terrorists. We're trying to be politically correct in the enforcement of law. The law is not supposed to be politically correct. It is there for an enforcement mechanism. Well, anyway, like I said, it's being stop and frisk, which has been proven to get illegal guns off the streets. It is a reason why New York City had the fewest murders last year since the 60s. I think they wound up with under 500 murders, where Chicago had over 1,200 and Los Angeles even more than that, because we had an enforcement mechanism that prevented the crimes from happening. Yet this is now being challenged in court by the same people who tell you, oh, what a tragedy what happened in Connecticut was. They are a bunch of hypocrites. All they care about is promoting their own agenda and their own little fiefdoms where they want to keep people from being free. They want you to believe that the government can protect you. The government cannot protect you. The fact the government will do more to hurt you. You have to understand, when you bring everything down to the lowest, to be equal, you have to go to the lowest idiot to be equal. You can't go to the highest, smartest person. You have to bring that person down to the lowest level. And the same thing with protection. You have to get people to surrender their rights to the government for to have, quote unquote, this government security, except the government can't make you, only you can. And this is what the founding fathers knew, was that true security, true liberty, the idea of self-government comes from you, the individual. The American culture was a culture of individualism. How far can one person go with the talents they have? And so now you have people that want, in the name now of the children of the tragedy, want to use this to take away more liberties, yet they won't, it's not what they're taking. If they would concentrate on enforcing the laws that exist, and that includes the mental health laws. You have people like the shooter that had mental problems. He was on meds, yet he was able to access guns instead of being put somewhere because some other judge somewhere else a long time ago ruled that even though people are a danger to themselves, we can't put them away for their protection. They're allowed to roam the streets. They have the freedom to harm themselves and others, but you don't have the freedom to protect yourself from that harm. And that's not the way it's supposed to work. So that's where we are right now with going on with this overreaction to the shooting in Connecticut, and it is an overreaction. We have sufficient laws, and whatever the governor proposes, what all these other politicians have proposed as assault bans and clips and all that, would not have prevented what happened. There was even security on the door, which to get kids shot up, and now shot open the door. You really can't stop somebody if they want to get you. It's not going to happen. If somebody's intent on committing a crime, they will commit it, and there's nothing you can do to stop it without shredding the Constitution into pieces and taking away all people's liberties. And so this is what you have to keep in mind when you hear all this talk. They want to panic you. They want you to make you think that this is happening all the time. It's not. There have actually been, in the last decade, less mass killings than in the 20 years before that. And the worst mass killing was 47 students, happened down south in 1930s. So it was in the late 1930s, where the guy used dynamite. Didn't even use a gun. But you don't hear about this. They want you to think that history started when you were born or when you woke up this morning, and everything is the worst than it's ever been. Well, that's not true. There's always something worse. We are not living in the worst times, the most lawless decade that you can imagine. Even politically, we're not living in the worst times. I mean, my God, the campaigns back at the turn of the 1700s to the 1800s were even worse. Back then, newspapers were more honest than what they were now. See, back then, on the masthead of a newspaper was supposed to be their political affiliation. Right there on the masthead. So you knew when you got that newspaper, you knew what they were trying to impart on you, what their agenda was. Now we have this idea that newspapers are impartial observers just to inform. No, newspapers are still to indoctrinate. They just tried to hide under this thing about inform, but they wanted to... See, bias in the news is not what they print. Bias in the news is what they leave out. The vital information you need to know that this isn't the worst that's ever been. And the fact is, like I said, when it comes to these mass killings, that they have decreased. In fact, more people from 1999 to 2011, more people were killed with non-guns using knives or fists or poisons than that were killed with guns. That was the latest statistics you released, and goes up to 2011. That shootings from any kind of weapon are down from 1999 to 2011. But they don't want to tell you that because that's not the template. You have to understand that we are a violent people. We're not a violent people. We're an independent people. We were spawns of rugged individuals that came to this country when it was a wilderness to set out to improve their lives and the lives of their future generations. And it's in our DNA to have this in us, this freedom, this individualism. And that's why you have a fight right now. And to say that you want to protect yourself, you want your liberty, you want to be the best that you can be, and you want to be a country of the rule of law based on the constitutional principle of limited government, you are now called a radical, a teabagger, a conservative, and you are myopic, homophobic, xenophobic, bigoted, racist, all sorts of things, because they have to mischaracterize the fact that you believe in personal liberty and that you believe that the founding fathers were right, that this experiment in self-governance is not a failure, that it has its bumps in the roads. And there were mechanisms in the Constitution that adjusted to those bumps in the roads, like in time of war, when Lincoln nullified the Habeas Corpus Act and jailed people without reason. The Supreme Court okayed that. The Supreme Court okayed when Roosevelt rounded up the Japanese during World War II and put them in camps because we were in a time of war. Now, unlike with the Habeas Corpus Act, what the Supreme Court did under Ronald Reagan was give compensation now to those survivors of those internment camps because the war, and they were entitled to be compensated now for what they had lost because they were just American citizens. They had not posed a threat to the United States other than by their nationality. And what the government's trying to tell you is that a person, and what the Journal News wants you to think, is that the person that owns a gun for their own protection poses a threat to you. What poses a threat to you right now is the Journal News telling criminals that you people out there that don't own a gun, and you're easy pickings. And my suggestion, I don't believe in punishing advertisers. They're just trying to get their message out. And they're trying to, you see the same advertisers in most of the local papers. They're trying to reach an audience to sell their product. It's not that they're advocating the editorial stance of that paper, because you'll see their ads in all the papers, no matter what the editorial stance. So you don't punish them. What I think should be done, what I would do, is cancel my subscription to the Journal News if you had, if you were victimized, you feel victimized by this publication or the publication of your name and address, or you may be victimized in public when eventually the Journal News wins their court battle, because they must win it because that's the way the law is written. Unless we get an activist court on the side of the people, which very rarely happens. It's usually on the side of the government when they're activists. But I would cancel my subscription and hurt them where it hurts the most, because they are a for-profit organization. They're private enterprise. And the only way you let a private enterprise know you don't agree with a business practice is to stop supporting that business. Any more than you would stop going to a restaurant that served you bad food or gave you bad service. You're not doing anything wrong by saying, I don't like what you did, and I'm not going to pay you to do what I don't like. I'm sorry. The problem with the press is they think the customer is always wrong. If you don't agree with them, you're wrong. No. Sometimes they're wrong. And on this one, even though they were legally right, they were morally wrong because they thought that their First Amendment right trumped the Second Amendment. And all the amendments are of equal value. Nothing trumps the other. And so you cannot get rid of one amendment or sacrifice part of an amendment without sacrificing all the amendments. And don't kid yourself. That's the liberal orthodoxy here. They're trying to panic you into giving up your individual liberty to the collective government, and they're going to promise you that we're not going to do anything wrong. Like with this database they want of all registered gun owners at a national level. They want a national but we're not going to do anything wrong with it, yo. So what if a private enterprise like the Journal News does something wrong? We're not going to do it. But you can't answer for what's going to happen 25, 30 years down the road. We have a responsibility to the next generation to give them a government and the same opportunity of individual achievement that our forebears left us. We have that responsibility. And you cannot let them panic you under the guise of for the children or for your safety or whatever, into sacrificing your liberty to the collective good. Because there is no collective good. As you saw with Al Gore's selling of Current Channel to Al Jazeera, taking oil money that Al Gore made his millions bashing the oil companies. Yet he took the oil money to enrich himself. That's the problem with liberals, the hypocrisy. And so you had a big meeting of all the staff of Current TV, and they couldn't believe that now they're working for Al Jazeera and being paid for oil money, because these people signed up to Current TV because they believed in what Al Gore was, the crap that he was spreading. That we're in it for the betterment of the world. Except Al Gore was in it for the betterment of himself. And that's capitalism. That is capitalism. And liberals don't mind it when it benefits them. That's why they want to be the ruling class. They just mind capitalism when it benefits you. So, what I want you to know is that whether it be with the press, with a TV station, with your gun laws, with these fiscal cliff arguments and these debt ceiling arguments, and they told you now that the nation's economy was going to go off the fiscal cliff and we were going to be in a recession if we didn't have it. Well, we are in a recession. And they taxed the rich, except that 70% of the people got tax increases because they made sure they didn't include the payroll tax. Listen, obviously I've talked too long. 30 minutes goes fast. This is what I say. What say you? Good evening. I'll see you next week.